Your Excellency Anthony, this is Global Digest Think Tank Group. We are discussing about political crisis, humanitarian crisis, and development issue around the world. And I know your profile, you've been working for United Nations. I don't know what's United Nations doing nowadays, a lot of crisis. Why UN cannot prevent much more than that? I mean, UN is doing something, but still there are many things we facing crisis. So, Your Excellency Anthony, please can you briefly introduce yourself and we can start our discussion.
My name is Anthony Ohemembuama, and I am the United Nations Resident Coordinator in the Republic of Guinea-Bissau. So I've worked with the UN for about 30 years. My supervisor is the Deputy Secretary General and the Secretary General. So yes, I'm a representative of the Secretary General.
I see.
In the Republic of Guinea-Bissau.
I see. So what is the role different? Because you have also ambassador, UN ambassador, but also you are working for on behalf of UN. I think he is on behalf of the government. So, but UN, I understand, is all representative of different country. You know, UN is not separate entity. So can you a little bit explain how the role of each one playing the role?
Yes. It's not very complicated. Obviously, the UN is an organization of members, and the members are countries. That is one. Two, the UN as an organization has staff, technical staff, different kinds of staff. I am one of those staff.
I see.
The staff of the UN do not represent any country. They work for the UN. And then the third element, which you pointed out, is that you have governments who have representations to the UN.
Right.
Just like naming an ambassador to another country, you have governments which name ambassadors to the UN.
I see.
So those are the three things I wanted to put across. But I am a technical staff of the UN. I do not represent my government. I work for the UN.
I see. So what your government ambassador to UN can do, and as you are on behalf of Secretary General, what role you can do? You can explain a little bit different role of each other, because you also a coordinator of the country, you know.
That is correct. Yeah. Obviously, I cannot speak for what the government representative to the UN will do. But obviously, you know, the UN has different kinds of things going on at many times. We just finished the General Assembly meetings in New York.
Right.
And a whole bunch of global issues were discussed, from climate change, humanitarian peace, human rights, development issues were presented and discussed. So countries with representations to the UN get involved in those debates and see how it impacts, how they influence, and how they implement certain resolutions that come from the UN. As a staff of the UN working in Guinea-Bissau, my mandate is to ensure the implementation of the UN's cooperation program with the Republic of Guinea-Bissau.
I see.
So we do discuss with the government where I am the support that the UN can provide, mostly in the development area. We sign the document, and then together with the UN agencies present in the country, we try to implement those programs to help the people and the government with the goal that we will help the development process and help the country to attain the sustainable development goals, which are the overarching development goals that every country in the world has subscribed to. So my work is primarily that with the UN as the head of the UN in Guinea-Bissau, dialoguing and implementing programs, development programs that we have agreed with the government and the people of Guinea-Bissau.
I see. So yourself is also Republic of Guinean citizen or not?
Yeah, but basically that is what it is. I mean,
so UN can only appoint each country citizen to be the country coordinator?
No, I am not from Guinea-Bissau. I am from Ghana, actually.
I see.
So it's extremely rare to appoint a national as a UN resident coordinator or representative of the Secretary General in their countries of origin. Obviously, I think many issues can come to your mind, including conflict of interest and so on and so forth.
I see. Usually UN appoint others national to the other country coordinator, not citizen.
Exactly. You are right.
Citizen. Yes. I see.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Yes.
And every country has the country coordinator.
All the countries in which the UN has development programs.
I see.
There is a resident coordinator who is also the representative of the Secretary General. And their role is primarily to mobilize all the UN entities in the country to provide support to the country in which we are. Yes. So you have,
every country may not have, some may not have, right?
Some may not have if it's not a program country. And when I go back to the introduction, the UN comprises almost all the independent countries in the world, right? The UN appoints resident coordinators to countries where the UN has development cooperation programs, largely. And so many countries which are still members of the UN will not have resident coordinators because their role, in my view, is primarily cooperating, collaborating on the development work and related humanitarian human rights work of the UN.
You mean SGD development, substantial development program?
That is correct. Yes.
So UN has program, substantial development program, not for every country. What about all undeveloped country or underdeveloped country? They have such kind of program?
Yes, I think in almost all developing countries, there is a UN presence. And most of the UN presence is focused on development cooperation, largely. And I say development cooperation because you and I know a lot of things go into making sure development cooperation is in the right place. Human rights, preventing humanitarian issues, preventing conflict and crises, and sustaining peace. I think these are all the fundamentals of an effective development program or a development strategy.
So now you have to oversee all issues, political crisis, economic crisis, or humanitarian crisis of all these, the country Republic of Guinea issue you have to oversee. Is something like that?
To a large extent, yes, because to the extent that the issues that you have mentioned will have an impact on the development process, in my role, I have to find ways of ensuring that there are solutions to those things to prevent derailing the development process. I think it's obvious that when you have a crisis, or let's say you have a conflict going on in a country, it's difficult to do development at the same time.
Right.
So if you can prevent a crisis or a conflict from happening, you have more chances of carrying out your development mandate.
So right
So
now,
all those things are linked.
Right now in Republic of Guinea, what you main responsibility and what you are overseeing specific projects?
Yes. We signed a cooperation framework with the government, and it has three main priority areas. The first priority area is in the governance arena, issues relating to peace, issues relating to preventing conflict, issues relating to building institutional capacity to ensure that there is good governance. The second priority area has to do with economic transformation and environmental management. So we do have programs, obviously, in attenuating the effects of climate change. I mean, it's a coastal country. So, for instance, we have programs to ensure that erosions on the coasts, are averted with rising waters. We are also very keen on ensuring that the country has an industrialization program because, through industry, you add value to your products and you can also create jobs.
Right.
And the third priority area is mainly in the social sector, primarily health and education. So we do also provide support in terms of technical assistance, training, capacity building, ensuring that there are very good and applicable development strategies in health and education. So these are the three main priorities, which I and the UN system, I say UN system because there are agencies in the country.
Right.
We help government and together with partners develop and implement programs in those three priority areas.
Yes, Republic of Guinea is armed conflict or any domestic conflict ongoing now? I don't know about much about Republic of Guinea. So
the Republic of Guinea-Bissau, there is no conflict going on. It's calm, and so that is precisely the context in which we are working. There is no conflict.
I see. So maybe you take care more about economic issue. Maybe it's a pretty poor country or corruption, maybe.
It is relatively poor. And so the three areas that I outlined as the priority for the UN will contribute, obviously, in ensuring economic growth, in building strong institutional capacity, and also providing avenues and opportunities for the youth. Most of our countries, I think yours included, have very large youthful populations. So education, health, economic transformation, I think these are the relevant things that we are trying to also bring to bear.
Yes, I've been discussing with many researchers from Africa, from different countries. I heard they are elaborating in Africa why African countries are poor and not developing. Many researchers, they point out a lot of corruption and political will are not there, something like that. So I am not in the field. I don't see practically. I have no experience. So you know better than me, and you experience, you are directly managing, overseeing. So what are the main reasons in Africa most problem?
Yeah, obviously, as you indicated, the researchers you spoke to gave reasons including corruption and political will. What I will say is that corruption is everywhere.
Right.
Corruption is not an African issue.
Maybe that the characteristic of corruption may be different, but different
Exactly.
kind of corruption. But yeah,
You're absolutely right.
big corruption or small corruption, or it may be. So
Yes, yes.
how is in Africa?
Yeah. But to get back to the main question, I think in my view, one of the drawbacks to growth and poverty reduction is industrialization and diversification of the economies. Um, if you have mostly agrarian economies without value addition, it will take you a longer time in terms of creating wealth and reducing poverty.
Right.
There is also need, obviously, for infrastructure. And infrastructure, I mean infrastructure largely. These days, we talk about digitalization, and so infrastructure includes all those things. It includes roads and bridges, all the things that enhance economic performance, all the things that could attract investments in terms of adding value to whatever the country has. And I think in many countries in Africa, there is an infrastructural deficit. So I think this is one of those things. And then the third element is the whole concept of education, rethinking the concept of education. Education that enhances productivity, education that prepares the youth, particularly for the jobs of the future and the jobs today. It's just obvious, and I think you know, that I can sit wherever I am in Guinea-Bissau if I have certain skills and be providing services to a company in France.
Right.
And so there is need to look at those elements as well. A fourth element, I think, is also looking largely at regional integration. I think if Africa focuses on regional integration and lets it evolve as it's happening in parts of Southeast Asia, for instance, you build economies of scale, you increase intra-region trade, you actually build specializations within that context. And then you become competitive in the global market. And that obviously enhances growth, it enhances job creation. And then the last element is obviously the whole issue of political stability. I think the whole world is going through different phases of political stability. And but we know that you need a stable foundation on which to build anything. And in most of our countries, that stable foundation, I think, is political foundation, the governance system, the peaceful things we talk about, preventing conflict. These are all embedded within the whole political infrastructure. Some countries in Africa are doing better than others. It's a global phenomenon now where even what we believed are being challenged in the political space. But I think those are the 5 elements, in my view, which enhance or detract from economic growth and development.
I see. By the way, Republic of Guinea is not Guinea is not is I mean it is no conflict, and isn't it a democracy country?
Yeah. The official name of the country is the Republic of Guinea-Bissau, because there's another Republic of Guinea.
I see.
But I am in the Republic of Guinea-Bissau, and as I had indicated, there is
right.
Yes, there is no conflict. It's a democracy. We have a president in place who was elected through elections, and so the question is rebuilding the institutions, making sure that the country provides that environment which comforts investors, attracts investors, and helps to develop and promote economic growth.
Isn't the government and the president dedicated for the economic growth or development of the country?
Well, obviously, the government, you go into elections with a program, right? And most programs in many countries include largely what you want to do to change the lives of the population.
Not just verbally, I mean practical commitment.
Yeah, I mean, it's not verbally, it's a practical commitment, but there are constraints. I think you will bear with me that the investment space, with what is going on in the world, Russia-Ukraine war, inflation, have a lot more impact on developing countries, which depend on a lot of global imports, you see. And so, yes, where I am, the government is committed, but we are also feeling the effects of what is happening around the world.
I mean, there are external effects, but when I was talking with most researchers from Africa, mostly they point out there is a lack of commitment and, lack of interest by leadership, the authority, government, the president, even they are very highly graduated from Harvard or Oxford, but they cannot make the country develop, or they feel the commitment is not there, no political will. Frequently they say, because I mean, we cannot always blame external. There are many factor, internal things supposed to done, but they never did it. Isn't that most the leadership lack of commitment? But you are saying they are still committed for development. I mean, we cannot blame the other one, why even they, I mean, verbally they will always say when the election is near, but practical things we can see in later on.
No, I mean, there are a couple of things. One is that if I take the continent of Africa with 54 countries, I mean, you cannot paint the whole continent with the same brush stroke.
But at least many are similar. They said I've been talking different from different West or East, South African continent, but the tendency, many are similar. Not much.
There are similarities and there are differences. That is the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah,
and so you could measure however you define commitment differently across the countries. So the point I'm trying to make is that a government runs on a program and wins an election. And then when it's in power, it tries to implement that program. That is a commitment. The speed at which it's executed, other factors that come in and distract the government, obviously could be interpreted differently. But it is extremely difficult to assume that there are governments in power which have zero commitment in terms of developing the countries in which they are governing. It's just a differentiated application of what this commitment entails. That is one. And the demonstration of that commitment could be the internal politics of the country. It could detract or enhance that commitment. The resource availability within the country, it could detract or enhance the commitment. And as much as I agree with you that it is not the external factors in which should probably be the overriding consideration. If you take the fact that most of these countries also depend on, say, international financial institutions for financial resources to put in place their programs, then obviously when you have this global environment that we have with high inflation, contracting international financial markets that do not even allow countries that could access external finance to do so, yes, then the external also has a role to play. But yes, at the end of the day, the will of the government to change the lives of its people, what we are calling commitment here, should be the main consideration, and that I agree with you.
Sure. I mean, there are no country they are committed for zero, you know. They do
Exactly.
they do commitment, but maybe very little, you know, and not significant their commitment. So that is the thing in many developing countries are facing, you know.
Yes.
You want to blame the other feet, or you don't want to blame your own feet or something. There are
Yes.
many developing country has such kind of problem. Or can you say the African culture, those corruption, corruption is a kind of culture in Africa, like developing country, because the government used to practice such kind of corruption, and the other person also doing same thing, you know, knowingly or unknowingly is becoming like a culture. It's true, or how do you see about corruption culture?
There is nothing as corruption as a culture in Africa. I think that is false.
Right.
And I
guess
think
so.
we discussed the issue that corruption is a global phenomenon. So it's just a matter of how it manifests itself in different places. So there is no corruption in Africa as a culture of Africans or a culture of the continent. I think that is a false narrative.
Maybe personality and individual characteristic, right? Or each country leadership characteristics. Some, I guess, not. I don't think it is a good for any country or any you know, any nation representative culture. Nobody represented such kind of corruption culture, you know. But
yes,
they are
yes,
still happening in those developing mostly developing country, and you know, those countries are facing such kind of corruption.
Yeah, and you know, like I said, corruption is a worldwide phenomenon, and the way you reduce it is by building strong institutions to prosecute those who go against the law.
Right.
And so, the stronger the institutions are, let's say the older the institutions are, the education of the population to accept and reject certain things, all these come together if you want to stamp out corruption. And that is why I said it's a dynamic. Some countries are doing better than others. And the goal of every country is to stop corruption, because corruption is illegal.
I see.
You know, and so
in many, all Africa countries consider corruption as illegal.
Of course, corruption, misappropriation, they are against the law in every African country.
Officially illegal, but you know, at behind the scenes, behind the picture, it's happening, right?
But
Something like that.
it's happening in your it's happening in your country as well.
Right,
It's
right,
happening all over the world, but that doesn't make it legal. And so I think the goal of every government is to stamp this out.
right.
The stronger your institutions are, the enforcement mechanisms, the easier and faster you are able to do these things. So it's a dynamic with different countries doing different things at different stages in terms of ensuring that corruption is stamped out. I mean, I think it's a bit uh, extreme to even think that any country will accept an illegal practice to pervade within the country. If
Probably.
it were legal, people wouldn't do it hiding. And so I think what has to be understood is that it is not an acceptable practice in any country. And every country is working very hard to stamp it out because it has its impact on the development process. It
That's
siphons resources and it leads to mismanagement and it destroys the development process.
then if there is mechanism to identify, to uh, reveal those kind of behind the scenes, that will
Mm-hmm.
make more, cleaning corruption or removing corruption, that can helpful for the country. So we need to find what kind of mechanism to identify, because if the leader or the government is uh, abolishing all this mechanism which can
Mm-hmm.
identify or which can reveal the corruption, it will never able to see behind the scenes what's happening, so we
Yeah,
need to
you
make
are
a
right,
strong
but
mechanism to
you
find
are
those
right.
things.
You are right. But when you look at Africa, I think Africa, almost all the countries have, press freedom and journalists who can actually do investigation to unearth some of these things. Almost all the African countries have independent auditor generals, and some even have special prosecutors offices to look into these kinds of things. So I think the efforts are ongoing to ensure that these things are stamped.
And it needs to be
Corrupt
strong, right?
practices are stamped. Exactly. Some have to be stronger, and the enforcement mechanisms have to continue. And so, yes, corruption pervades everywhere, and you just have to continuously put in place the mechanisms to ensure that they do not destroy the development and even the democratic experiment. And I think that is what all the African countries are doing.
We've been talking about the the commitment of the leader and the country, the government. But what about external factor? Example, the country need sufficient external finance or some kind of a technician, such thing. UN can provide sufficient demand from the host country, or how much UN can assist them, support them to the developing country, especially.
Well, I mean, the UN is not technically a financial entity. We
I
do
see.
bring to the countries global commitments on development strategies, and then we do have, in most cases, voluntary contributions from member countries to demonstrate how to take those commitments forward. But in the larger scheme of things, countries have to finance their own development strategies. And the main source of financing development strategies is domestic resources. And these are complemented by external resources, whether from financial institutions like the World Bank, Africa Development Bank, the IMF, or from the financial markets. And so I think in the earlier discussion, when we were looking at some of the constraints to development, I had mentioned what is happening globally now, which is basically reducing the availability of financing to some of these development countries. But yes, the UN brings the ideas, the commitments that have been agreed to, the strategies for development. We help countries prepare their development programs along those lines with a little bit of funding, but it's just piloting. And then the countries have to fund the process from domestic resources or external sources.
So the country can request IMF or World Bank or regional bank, but the bank may not provide whatever they needed or as much as they wanted, right? Or in case of difficulty finance, UN should give a kind of suggestion or pushing the financial sector. I mean IMF or World Bank or other who can help such kind of finance. What role UN can play?
We can play probably two roles. One of them is helping the country develop a good development program, developing bankable programs. Because if you do good programs, the likelihood of getting financing increase. And then the second is basically also facilitating the process, because we are in the same country, sometimes with the representatives of these kinds of financial institutions, whether it's the Africa Development Bank, the IMF, or the World Bank. So we also do discuss on some of the urgent and important things that can help the development process. So we could also bring to bear those kinds of facilitation services. Yes.
So UN has special consideration if the country is improving democratic system, and if the country not willing to change for authoritarian to democracy, UN might not much helpful to the authoritarian country. What UN recommended those countries? I guess most human rights and most norm and those standard democratization and human rights is mentioned many times, right? So it's really important the country to be improved democracy and human rights.
Yes, I mean, I had said something earlier, and I'll go back to that. The UN is a club.
Right.
If you join any club, there are rules, okay? Every member country of the UN, I think with exception of a few, have signed on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They've signed on various treaties relating to rights of women, the rights of the child. All these instruments that help enhance the development process. So what we have to understand is that I don't come in imposing those things, because the member country has already signed those things. My job is to show the importance of those things, applying them for enhancing the development process, the democratization process. And from that perspective, we have the UN presence in many countries that some people might not consider democratic. But it's part of our work to ensure and to dialogue for the application of these principles that most of these countries have signed, and to let them understand that if you apply them, if you demonstrate them concretely, it helps the development process. It helps your population grow in terms of their rights, and so on and so forth. And so, yes, we help countries understand these principles and their application, and we are present in all the developing countries, irrespective of where they are in terms of their governance system.
So UN really seriously consider all those norm and standard, democracy and human rights ones related to development.
Yeah, I believe so. It's my personal belief that
It's
when you
UN
talk
mandate.
about if you talk about rights, rights have implications on investment. I mean, if you abuse the rights of your own people, I think it will be extremely difficult for someone to have confidence to invest large sums of money in your country. Some may do, but for different reasons. But I think you are an academic researcher. I think you can actually do a research which will show that the likelihood of getting more investments if you have a very let's say negative human rights space will be limited for the fear that there could be just appropriation of my resources without any recourse to law or justice. I mean, those things are, those elements are linked. And so, yes, they could help enhance the investment space. But I believe strongly that the issue of human rights is just the issue of the person, the human being. I think at the end of the day, whether it's you or it's me, there are certain freedoms, there are certain things that are naturally mine, which becomes extremely difficult and in my view even reduces the individual's humanity when not granted. And I think this is probably the qualitative dimensions of it, of making every human being live fully as a human being. And it's different from all those other considerations that enhance the investment space and bring investors and development and so on and so forth. I think the aspect of the human being living fully his or her God-given talents, I think is extremely important in this kind of dialogue.
Usually, authoritarian ignore democracy and human rights. It may be delay the country development as well as it will be discouraged by UN. So in terms of cooperation between UN and dictator country will be not much sophisticated if you are too much violation and too much abuse human rights. I mean, in that way, it is a negative thing, right?
Exactly. Obviously, it is. I mean, it's the UN is a norm-based institution, and so there are certain things that the organization will not accept or will not just pretend and support. And I think what you just described, I think it's apt. It's correct. That obviously, if a country doesn't respect the human rights of its population, that country jeopardizes its cooperation with every international organization and even including private investors. And so if you have a UN presence, the UN presence will be to encourage that country to respect and honor, human rights.
So in case of the country abuse human rights and they ignore democratization in the country, as the country coordinator under secretary representative, you have to report back to your boss, to the secretary general, and what you are doing in
it's an ongoing
those
dialogue.
cases.
Yes, it's an ongoing dialogue, and there's communication between me and my headquarters on what we have as a program with the country and how it's progressing. So if the program is not progressing because of, say, human rights abuses, yes, I think it will be part of that communication with my headquarters.
And I mean, all this discussion and reporting to headquarters you are doing, but the I mean the response from UN or UN action to those dictator country may be rare, right? UN cannot do much, something like that.
It's on a scale. I think countries which egregiously abuse human rights against the UN Charter could be subjected to certain forms of sanction.
Right.
And the human rights are not only for the UN; they are for the whole international community. So it could even be bigger than the UN in terms of even private investors reconsidering their own business dealings with the country. The UN by itself is not a police organization. It's not even like a country, a powerful country, which can decide that because country X is abusing human rights, I'm just going to close it up or arrest its leadership and that sort of thing. Um, it's moral suasion, you know, the kinds of conversations, communication that would ensure that we try to change people's mind. You know, it's the Secretary General has a bully pulpit, you know, using the whole moral principles and the fundamentals of the UN Charter to get the member countries to do what is right. And yes, as you have indicated, sometimes we are successful. Sometimes we are not successful in the short term, but we are successful in the long term. And so things that might be considered failures in the short term actually bear fruit in the long term. Unfortunately, that is the nature of international cooperation. There is no other enforcement mechanism besides the ongoing dialogue and communication. And powerful countries who, for whatever reasons, can sanction certain countries based on different things would do them. If for whatever egregious violation, the Security Council decides that the UN should place sanctions on country A, B, C, D, then the UN then follows through as well. But even then, its effective implementation also depends on the actions of the member countries.
And by the way, as like you, as country coordinator, what is different between the country coordinator and the UN special representative? Example, in Myanmar, there is a special envoy,
Yes.
but I think she is not the country coordinator, right?
No, it's not. No.
How is different? What is her specific role? And is there the country coordinator in Myanmar? I don't know.
Yeah, the official title is the resident coordinator, and there is one in Myanmar. The UN resident coordinator, as I had indicated previously, is in a normal country setting where you have development cooperation with the country. So the basic emphasis is on development cooperation and all those other things that come into it, whether it's humanitarian, human rights, some of the political dialogue that enhances that development cooperation.
I see.
And so when you hear the UN resident coordinator, think development, normal development situation, okay? When you have a special representative of the Secretary General, the word special is very important. It means they are looking at specific things in terms of ensuring an enhanced membership and enhanced communication between the UN as an entity and that country. And so you could have special representatives in countries where there are massive abuses of human rights.
Right.
You can have a special representative in the country which is in crisis, which is in a conflict, and so on and so forth. But that role tends to be in special circumstances where you need something more for
More
the
than resident coordinator.
yes, to complement or to enhance whatever the resident coordinator is doing.
And there's also human rights rapporteur.
You can have the rapporteurs. Those are also part of the human rights mechanisms. Rapporteurs,
Specifically human rights.
yes, and they'll be looking at different things, different aspects of human rights. Yes.
See, those human rights rapporteur and UN Secretary General Special Envoy and the country resident coordinator. So these all are slightly different roles.
They are different roles. They are not slightly, they are different roles.
I see.
They are different roles, and they all come together in a sense because the UN tries to enhance its collaboration with member countries. And when I say enhance its collaboration, it's basically helping countries to respect the norms that they have adopted by being members of the UN body. And so that's what we do. There are different roles, but they all go towards the main object, the same objective.
So they all report to UN headquarters.
They will all report. If you are a special representative or of the Secretary General or a special envoy, you have been sent on behalf of the Secretary General, so you will respond back to the.
What is the most what's most power they have? What the most as representative of Secretary General, what he or she can do the most powerful thing?
It's not an issue of power. It's an issue of a dialogue, and they will report back. If the mission that has been assigned is not progressing, they'll report back. Usually, when you have a special representative, they also report to the Security Council because these are positions which are named by the Secretary General in consultation and sometimes and mostly endorsed by the Security Council. So they will report back to the Security Council, they will report back to the Secretary General, and then the body that appointed them will then decide what else to do. So it's not like the powerfulness of the individual, but it's the ongoing communication to ensure that we enhance the collaboration and the dialogue, and to bring the member countries to respect the norms which they have signed on to.
He or she, the representative, cannot have the word ultimatum to the country if the country doesn't cooperate to the UN. It's not such kind of power, right?
No, as an individual, we don't do that. He or she cannot do that. He or she can report, and then the Security Council can decide on different kinds of actions.
So the ultimatum power in the UN system is the Security Council, right?
Depending on the individual, is the Security Council. In fact, in international law, obviously, you know that the Security Council plays a major role in terms of war and peace issues. It is the largest, it is the highest architecture in terms of the international jurisprudence on some of these things. So yes, the Security Council, when it functions well, can be a powerful arbiter in some of these discussions.
Maybe Security Council can not always may not obey what Secretary General serious recommendation or special endorsement. may not always be, they will be, agree upon that, or I see Security Council also always divided, right?
Yes, I mean the Secretary General will always analyze issues and make presentations as to what he thinks could be done in different situations. Um, you know the composition of the Security Council. There are members with veto power, and they always all do not see in the same way. So yes, the Secretary General could make a cogent presentation for a certain way of doing things, which might be voted down by the Security Council. Yes, it's part of the nature of the UN system.
See, in case the Security Council is divided and cannot make any decision, Secretary General has a kind of role. Secretary General can do temporary thing or urgent thing decision on any issue if Security Council cannot make a decision.
There is the General Assembly. The General Assembly can also vote on certain issues. But the basic point is that the role of the Secretary General
I mean, General Assembly, it take time, it take time and organize many things. But if you need urgent thing within a few days, that's something Secretary General has some role or can do some little bit urgent things.
Oh yeah, I mean, there are things that are done. It's not everything that goes to the Security Council. There are things, even at my level, there are things I can take action without even referring to my bosses in New York. So, but it depends on the gravity of the situation. If you come to the Security Council, generally you're talking about a lot more bigger crises that threaten world peace and so on and so forth, threaten world norms and so on and so forth. Yeah,
right. Right.
But there are actions we take every day in terms of ensuring that the cooperation with the countries continue to progress. But it's a lot more difficult in political war, peace issues, where you need the approval of the Security Council to do much if there is a blockade. Yes.
Maybe you cannot deal anything with the other country issue. Example, you are Republic of Guinea-Bissau country, you are coordinator of that country. But if other country something want to share with you, or you cannot deal with that, right? That particular country coordinator, resident coordinator should deal those country issue, or you can share each other among resident coordinator, or very stricted for dealing other country issue.
Yeah, I'm responsible for the country in which I am, and there are colleagues in other countries. Right. But we do share information. That is one. Two, certain issues are not restricted within country. Like now, everybody talks about climate change, environmental degradation, all these kinds of things, and some of them are not restricted to countries. So invariably, we do exchange information. Issues of migration, we do share information. And so in some places, we actually even have cross-border programs.
Right. Because many cross-border issue,
Exactly. So because the issue crosses many countries. So yes, we have that flexibility to talk, discuss, and implement a common program.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Anthony. It's made a lot of helpful thing to our audience. They understand more about UN system, how resident coordinator, how Secretary General working, because it's not easy to understand ordinary people. Once you explain, it's much more easier.
Thank you, Mr. John, and thanks for the opportunity to chat. And I'm always available if there's anything else we can do. Thank you very much.